Shall we?
Let's go. With the Avon.
I'm gonna put the whole thing in.
Go for it.
That sounded weird. Tonight on Dinner with Ish, I'm in Crown Heights, grabbing some finger-licking barbecue at Izzy's Smokehouse. Izzy's is a rapidly growing barbecue joint with locations in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Miami. Known for their smoke wings, massive Dino ribs, and slamming sides, Izzy's has put their stamp on traditional barbecue, all while keeping it kosher. Joining me tonight is Jewish-Israeli activist and filmmaker Rudy Rochman. Rudy recently grabbed the attention of millions with his video response to Kanye's controversial comments on the Jewish community. After going viral, all eyes are on what Rudy will say and do next. Join me at the table as we discuss the divide, get to know the real Rudy Rochman, and start a conversation in hopes of bridging the gap. Grab your seat at the table. This is Dinner with Ish. Izzy, Vinny, what's up, guys?
Yo!
How are you?
What's going on? Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, man. This place smells amazing.
Thank you.
Bro, I have a guest tonight. He's from Europe. He's been in Israel a whole bunch, but I wanted to bring him to some really good old-fashioned American barbecue.
You made a very good choice.
And I heard Izzy's the kosher spot.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. It is.
It's the best barbecue in the city.
We try our best.
Well, thanks again for having me. I'm going to be bringing him in really shortly, and I'm hoping you're going to serve up the best.
All right. Looking forward.
Thanks, bro.
What's up, bro?
So long, man. Thanks for joining me. Have a seat, please. Thank you for joining me at the table on Dinner with Ish. I heard you were in New York, and I wanted to kind of have you on the show, and I thought the only thing that was fitting for you is the Smokehouse. So one of the things I really wanted to connect with you on was not just good food, but also some of that real talk, right? And very recently, a lot of things have been happening in the media. A lot of things have been happening between, I guess, our two cultures, the Black community as well as the Jewish community. And I really thought a conversation between two individuals is important at this time.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna have really good food. We're gonna have some really good conversations. And if there's anything that you want to share with us or anything that you feel needs to be brought to light, I welcome it, and I would love if you do just that.
Well, first I want to say thank you for creating a platform to bring truth and to be able to take truth from different sides and to create one holistic truth that includes all truths. Because a lot of people have different truths, but they use it as weapons against each other.
100%.
And that's how we continue fueling the fire of war rather than actually finding a way for all of us to move forward together.
Yeah, totally. So as we wait for the appetizers to make their way to us, I kind of want to ask just one question. You know, I know just a little bit about you. A really good friend of mine, Sarah, reposted your video. It was your reply to Kanye. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I want to know, who is Rudy Rochman?
So I'm a Jew, first and foremost,
Okay.
specifically from the tribe of Levi, from both sides of my family. I think that my soul was brought into this world to bring light to the problems that I see, which is what I think everyone should do. The problems that I see is the disempowerment of the younger generation of the Jewish people, only practicing Judaism but not putting Judaism into practice. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we talk a lot as a Jewish community to bring a light to the world and to heal the world. Well, how about we heal our own home with our own cousins first? The fact that we have tribes of Israel that have been displaced to the four corners of the earth and we have no idea about who we are. And of course, the response to Jews assimilating and forgetting their purpose is a rise of anti-Semitism, which we've also been facing. So my story begins in France, that's where I was born. All of my grandparents were born in different countries. On my mother's side of the family, they were born actually in Africa, in Morocco and Algeria.
Yep.
On my father's side of the family, they were born in Poland and Belgium. And all of my grandparents were persecuted for being Jews. Out of the countries, and their family members were killed for being Jews. And both my parents were first generation born in France as refugees. So being born in France with grandparents that came from different countries, it was very strange to me to identify as Moroccan or Algerian or Polish when we weren't Polish in Poland and we weren't Moroccan in Morocco.
Right.
And I looked at other Jews that weren't Russian in Russia, weren't German in Germany, weren't Yemenite in Yemen, weren't Ethiopian in Ethiopia. And I realized that these are places that we had an experience in because we were forced out of a land, but not the origins of where we come from.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things happened to me growing up that made me wake up to realizing who I actually am. And because I've had to move around so many different places, from France to Israel to Miami, I've lived in Asia, I've lived in South America, I've lived in New York and LA and Palo Alto and so many different places. But growing up mainly in Miami when I was younger, Miami, I would say, is one of the most un-American cities in all of America. No one identifies as American.
It's super mixed. It's just like a whole bunch of
even
different
if you're
things.
born there, you're like Argentinian, Venezuelan, Colombian, Haitian,
Right.
Jamaican. Like you really rep whatever place your parents or where you were born.
100%.
So growing up, I was always labeled the French kid. And when I'd visit my family in France, I'm the American cousin. And it's like, am I really who I am based on who's asking me the question or where the question is being asked?
Did you feel like you just didn't belong because of that, constant moving from place to place? Or do you think it was something deeper than that? It was something more rooted as far as like where your family's been from and the displacement of your family into other places?
So I've always had this intuitive understanding that I come from Israel.
Okay.
But I didn't have the ability to explain this feeling that I had within me. So when people would ask me where I was from, I had my answer, but I didn't know how to express that to others.
Yeah.
And there's something that happened to me at age 7 that really completely changed my life. It's a story that I talk about often because it's really what activated me on the path of activism. So I was a 7-year-old. We took a trip to London with my mom and my younger brother. And my mom was wearing a shirt with Hebrew on, as I'm sure you've seen many people here in New York with Hebrew somewhat on their clothing.
Especially
or
Crown Heights, where we are right now,
exactly.
right?
And you would know that it's Hebrew, right? If you saw that, you would know it's Hebrew. The same way if you saw Portuguese, you would say it's Portuguese, not Brazilian. You would know it's Portuguese. So the bus driver in London sees my mom's shirt and says, excuse me, is that written in Jewish? And mom says, no, it's written in Hebrew, but it's the language of the Jewish people. That's what you're asking. And she's like, oh, so you guys are Jews? She's like, yeah, what's the problem? He's like, I don't want any Jews on my bus, you have to get off. And my mom, being a very strong Sephardic, Leo sign woman, said, I don't know who you think you are, we're not getting off this bus. And he got up, grabbed my mom, and threw her off.
Wow.
And this,
he physically
took my mom and threw her off. And this moment completely changed my life. It made me have to reassess everything. At that moment, I wanted to do something, but I didn't have the tools.
You're 7 years old.
Is huge.
Yeah.
But I was in warrior mode right away. I was like, I need to do something, but I know that hitting this guy is not going to stop him. I had to go and get police in order to get the guy arrested. But I promised myself from that moment on that whenever I would see any form of darkness, injustice, problem in this world, even from the smallest amount where you're walking and you see something happening here and you're like, should I get involved or not? That I have to always be ready to deal with those situations and be prepared next time. Physically, emotionally, intellectually, ideologically, even understanding why these things are happening in the first place.
Yeah.
And the second thing that I cherish to this day, because that's actually a blessing of what happened to me, because it made me wake up, is it made me realize who I was. It didn't matter where I was born, grew up, lived in, traveled to, resided in, what passport I had, where my parents or grandparents were born. What mattered was that I was a Jew. And so that's when the next question was, what does it mean to be a Jew? And that was the evolution of the next step in my journey.
Wow. When people ask who's Ishmael, I'm giving them like 5 to 6 words, maybe like a paragraph. That was phenomenal. I mean, getting to know that about you is truly impactful, and it makes a lot more sense what really like pushes you to do what you do. I understand your father was also an activist, is that correct?
So both my parents greatly influenced me, and I had a really good balance because on my mother's side of the family they're Sephardic, so it's warm and very mystical and very spiritual, great food, emotional intelligence, and on my father's side they're very Ashkenazi. However, my father was not raised with much Jewish culture in the house. They were Jews, but they didn't really practice anything religious because, grandparents went through the Holocaust. We can't judge them after that experience. So the whole spirituality element and the customs came from my mom that my dad adopted. However, the mindset of the Ashkenazi Jews, which is a very logical mindset, I took from my father. Now, my dad, back in the day, was the president of the Jewish Student Union in France, the Ish Eps. This was in around the late 80s, and there were a lot of attacks against Jews, physical, which is on a much higher level than it is here in America, which is more ideological and intellectual. And there were times where he had to find ways to fight back and to defend himself. So I was raised with stories.
Physically or mentally?
Also physically. Let me give you an example. There were a group of students which happened to be from Algeria at the time, right? Does not represent all Algerians, but represents this small group of students. At that time, they weren't yet citizens of France. They were recent immigrants, so they were on student visas.
Right.
And if they were to commit a crime, they would get deported back to Algeria. Now, the way police works in France is on the campus grounds, you would only have security, you wouldn't have police. And so there were few events that they actually tried to come to the Jewish events and beat the students up. In fact, the one thing that sparked my father to really become an activist on campus is when they had an event and 2 students walked outside to go to the bathroom and they noticed one of these students from this group trying to light the building on fire to kill all the Jews inside. So what he did is he staged an event, a fake event, that he knew these students would come at the corner of the campus, got the police, warned that they were going to find a way to grab them and to bring them outside, got a bunch of these Jewish bikers that were very strong and grabbed them, threw them outside, and they got caught in the act of trying to beat up Jews, and they got deported the next day. So I was raised with stories of, you're not here to fight, you're here to win. You're here to accomplish a mission and to bring light, but when you're at war, you have to win, because if you don't, you die. So those are the stories that I was raised with my father that really gave me a perspective of whatever issue I'm going to deal with, I'm going to attack it head on. So a lot of people try to call us a religion, right? And when Jews say that we're a religion, what we mean by that is that we're a collective identity with a purpose, with a history, with a culture, with a tradition, with a spirituality, with a Torah, with a connection to the land, with an experience, with holidays. All that encompassing is our Jewish quote-unquote religion. However, the word religion in the English language and in the context of all actual religions is defined as a belief system in a God, deity, book, or prophet. So if an individual who is part of a religion, let's say Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, doesn't believe in the deity, God, book, or prophet anymore, they're now no longer part of that religion. Let's say someone grows up in a Christian family and they say at some point in their life, I no longer believe in Jesus, I don't believe in this stuff, they're not a Christian anymore. A Muslim, if they reject Muhammad in the Quran, is no longer a Muslim. A Buddhist that doesn't identify with philosophy as Buddha is not a Buddhist. And to become a Christian or to become a Muslim or to become a Buddhist, all you need to do is accept the deity, do a certain ritual, for example, converting to Islam, you wash your ears, your elbows, your feet, you say a certain prayer, you've accepted Muhammad and you become a Muslim. When you look at Judaism, it's not a wandering ideology that crosses over borders and nations. It's a physical people that came from a place that they themselves were forced to cross over those borders and nations. So Judaism is actually not a religion, it's an ancient civilization, like the Mayans, like the Aztecs, like today's native nations in the Americas and Canada, all sorts of native populations that you have all around the world. We're an ancient civilization that was smashed, and in order to preserve our identity, we created a portable suitcase called Judaism. And in this suitcase, we packed in our traditions, our values, our culture, our aspirations, our spirituality, and we passed it down generation to generation with the aspiration of next year in Jerusalem.
Awesome. This is Vinny. Vinny is the manager here at Izzy's. He's been a huge help in putting together this episode. So Vinny's going to tell us what we have here.
Okay, so I have here some smoked cow wings, which we smoke first, lightly fried, and then we top with a beautiful sriracha lime sauce. I have here our pulled beef empanadas, which is our brisket pulled apart. I have here our pulled beef tacos and our 18-hour smoked brisket.
Awesome.
Okay.
What should we start with, Vinny?
So I would definitely start with the wings.
Okay.
They are piping hot, but
Okay.
they're finger licking good.
Okay.
And then I'll do the brisket tacos, and then I'll attack the rest.
Very
Okay.
awesome. All right, so I know he said the smoked wings are like the must try here. So should we try that first?
We shall.
Okay. After you, my friend.
Thank you.
All right, so this is piping hot, so be careful. That's good.
It's not only good, it's very good.
It's really good, yeah. But it was important to you that we got kosher food, right?
Yeah.
So one, what is kosher? Because the audience that watches this isn't, a very widely Jewish audience. So what is kosher, and why is it so important?
So as you can see, kosher food can be very tasty.
Oh, it's amazing,
So it
yeah.
doesn't change the quality of the food. I think it's the chef that changes the quality of the food. But there are certain restrictions that Jews have on what to eat and what not to eat. I mean, if you look at America, most people don't eat certain animals that are pets, right? Dogs and cats that is like taboo to eat, right? So in our culture, as a Hebrew culture, there's certain animals that we don't eat as well. And for an animal to be kosher, it has to have split hooves, has to chew its cud, and has to have a certain amount of stomachs that it digests the food, and it has to be a herbivore.
Oh, wow.
So all those things ends up being that it's like cattle, like cows, sheep, goats end up being kosher, and other animals like horses and lions and dogs end up not being kosher. That's rule number one. Rule number two is that the animal itself has to be raised in a healthy way, without trauma, without suffering, and that also when it's killed, it has to be killed in a way that it doesn't feel any pain, and that the artery has to be held outside so that the blood doesn't go into the meat, doesn't taint the meat, and the blood goes outside and gets drained. So all those things end up being that the animal has to be raised in a very ethical way, has to be certain animals that are kosher and not kosher, and then there's rules for which fish is kosher, which is it must have gills, it must have scales, and it must have fins. And those fish end up being the grouper oysters, the halibut, the salmon, the tunas, the more premium fish, and sharks and animals like that are not kosher, or shellfish and catfish and things that are more bottom feeders that are eating like the waste of the ocean end up not being kosher.
That's crazy.
It's really like to eat the purest form of animals or produce of this world that you can. And then there's an additional thing where we don't mix dairy and meat.
Right.
Now that is like, okay, I get it on these animals, they have to be healthy, you don't want them to suffer, you don't want to take on that anxiety and that suffering from the other animals, but why dairy and meat? And the fascinating answer to that is, what does meat represent? It represents death, it's the flesh. And what does milk represent? What animal creates, exactly, right? An animal creates milk only when it's giving life to a young. And you can't mix those two energies together. They have to be kept separate.
All right. What do we have here, Vinny?
So we have here our 18-hour smoked brisket.
Ooh.
We have our burnt ends, which is the second cut of the brisket. It's cubed up and double smoked in our homemade barbecue sauce.
Okay.
And then I have here our short rib, which we call our Dino rib, with a massive bone there. It's one of our most juiciest tender meats.
Wow, that looks amazing. Awesome, man. What are you starting with?
I'm gonna start with the 18-hour.
18 hour? Okay.
18 is a very powerful number to the Jewish people.
Why is that?
Every letter within the Hebrew language represents a number.
Okay.
18 is Chai, which is Chet and Yud, which represents life. So whenever Jews give donations, we usually give donations in varieties of 18, which represents good life for whoever it is.
So this is a life brisket.
Some light brisket.
All right, so I got the burnt ends. You have the 18-hour. Was that the Dino?
No, the Dino is this one.
Okay.
I got the 18-hour
Brisket. All right, cool. Shall we?
Let's go. With the Avon.
I'm gonna put the whole thing in.
Go for it.
That sounded weird. Oh my god. Those burnt ends are amazing. How's the brisket?
Brisket's good. Clearly 18-hour cook.
It's a life brisket, 18 hours.
Exactly, there you go. I'm teaching you a lot of Jewish secrets. Next time you meet your Jewish friends, you're going to be like, I know about 18.
All right.
I know about kosher. I know about all those things.
I had a couple Jewish friends. I might have known a few secrets before
Yeah,
this.
there you go.
Careful. Kanye said the Jewish secrets were, something really impactful. So we can dive in on that.
They are very impactful, but in a good way. Not in a
Yeah,
bad way.
yeah. But they're secrets that are meant to be told.
Yeah, these are, I would say, secrets that are meant to be revealed. Things that all of humanity once knew, and at some point we lost it. And
Right.
that Jews, with our ancestors, were able to preserve it and are supposed to bring it back. Right? That's what being a light upon the world. It's not actually we're going to come with a big flashlight or create a bonfire. It's the darkness or the lack of truth that humanity exists within that have to be enlightened to be brought back to that truth.
So let's talk about some truths right now. When it comes to the conflict between Palestine and Israel, you've stuck up, I would say, for the Palestinian people, saying that you understand why they're frustrated and you understand the feeling of what they must be feeling. That outraged a lot of people, right? It frustrated a lot of people because they called, I guess, your loyalty into question with your statement. Where did that statement come from, and what did you mean by that when you said, I understand how they feel, I feel for them, we have to fix this before we can move on?
What's interesting in Israel, which is different than within America, is that the far right of Israel that is very anti-Palestinian will see me as someone that's on the left. And then the far left of Israel, that is usually pretty anti-Israel themselves, will see me as someone who's anti-them, right? I represent the other side of the extreme to both sides, which usually represents that you're actually speaking truth,
Right.
and any inclusion of a truth from the other side to this extreme will be seen as naturally you're my enemy, because I cannot see Palestinians as human beings and as any potential link together. So because I speak about Palestinians as humans and not only humans as my cousins, then all of a sudden I become the enemy to some very small minority group of people that have a very limited mindset. But the reality is that, at least myself within the Jewish community, I was never taught to hate Palestinians, but I was never taught to understand Palestinians either, to see them as human beings or to understand their identity, their culture, their experiences, their suffering historically and till this day. And I realized at some point that this whole narrative that to be pro-Palestinian you must be anti-Israel, or to be pro-Israel you must be anti-Palestinian, really will not get us anywhere, because there's no reality where Israelis or Palestinians disappear, and there's no reality where we will give up on being connected to this land from the river to the sea for both of us.
Are you Palestinian?
I'm here to talk about Zion.
Are you Palestinian?
Basic question.
I want to talk about Ben Gurion.
No, you don't want to talk. You don't want to talk.
He wants to talk. He doesn't want to have a conversation. Those are two different things.
So to continue this zero-sum game of playing victim Olympics and fighting each other and using our own identity and superimposing definitions on the other is fuel to the conflict to continue. And I live in Israel. I would like my children to be born there and their children to be born there. And I would like my Palestinian cousins to be born there and their children to be born there as well. And those who have been displaced to be able to come back, Jews and Palestinians. So if I want to create that reality, I have to understand the people in front of me, let alone the fact that Palestinians really are cousins with the Jews. A lot of Jews themselves don't even know, most Palestinians know, most Jews don't know, that 30 to 60% of Palestinians actually descend from Jewish origins that converted to Islam or Christianity over the years, and so they hold a lot of traditions and a connection that is eternal to them with Israel, but now they're not really a part of Israel because there's been this split.
Yeah.
So the way I see it is that any future solution that can exist is anyway a theory until it's proven, because we could always move forward in life and something happens that changes everything, right? COVID happened, no one could have predicted that,
Right.
and all of a sudden everything changes.
Right.
Who knows, maybe you have something happening in this world and everything changes then. So any talk about a solution is a theory, but any solution has to take two things into consideration for both peoples. Ending the injustices that both face, which are different, and fulfilling the aspirations that both have, which are different. And so what we've been working with on the ground with the younger generation of Jewish, Israeli, Palestinian activists on both sides is coming together, understanding each other's identities and experiences, and making lists of what are the top 10 things that are needed for the aspirations of the Palestinians. What are the top 10 things that are needed for the aspirations of Israelis? What are the things that you're mostly facing in terms of oppression? And what are the things that you're facing with oppression or suffering? And how do we create a reality that brings all those things together?
So when you say we, are you a part of those conversations?
Yeah,
If you
absolutely.
put those together?
Absolutely.
Aren't you fearful that, one, like Palestinians will, utilize that as a moment of weakness? Or two, are you nervous that your own people would see you as, fraternizing with essentially the enemy?
They're not the enemy. So because I have friends that were killed in war by Palestinians. I don't see that as all Palestinians, but I could also understand how a person that lost their brother, their sister, their mother, their father, their child, that they get so fed up with this sorrow and this pain and this suffering that they went through that all of a sudden they just project that on entire community. I understand how they've gotten to the conclusion, but they're missing a lot of truth and they're only looking at one aspect and then defining the entire other population by that one experience. So I'm able to disconnect from that and not see the world through that lens and understand why they're coming from the place that they are, which is from a place of trauma. Like with Palestinians as well, right? There are many Palestinians that I've engaged with that, come off and see that I'm Israeli and will, call me everything that's bad and that's negative, will blame me for their traumas. And after, a good few minutes of having conversation, of seeing that I validate their identity and experience and I'm not their enemy, I'm actually their cousin who has the intention of writing a new chapter of our history, of not taking what our ancestors fought with each other, let's say our grandparents and our parents' generation, and changing in this generation a different reality. And once you show your true colors, there's no reason to fight each other.
I think that's big, right? And I think kudos to you for being able to kind of like look past those that you've lost, and say, well, look, I'm not looking at you as the person that killed my family and my friends. I'm looking at you as a person first.
That's because I'm looking at the people I haven't yet lost as well. And I don't want this war to continue. I know what war does, and I know that if we continue, there will be more casualties on both sides. And if our intention of using our energy is to prevent war from happening, let's actually change the equation for us to have a different result, rather than just projecting our pain onto each other, creating more war and creating more death and a loop of suffering.
I've gone through your social media and I've seen you interact with a lot of people. Like a lot of times, like when you were in LA, you had an interaction with a young lady, and oftentimes it would be bickering, right? Back and forth. But you don't bicker with people. It seems you're very patient when you speak to people, when you communicate with them. Where does that patience come from? Because let's be honest here. I also went through your social media page and saw you posted up with some Glocks, and you're obviously someone that's been in the military. You can hold your own physically. I mean, I got a couple of guys here that I'm pretty sure you can knock them all down. You know what I mean? You're a tough guy. So how do you get past that stage of bickering and going head to head with someone that's obviously attacking you, and still maintain your composure to educate them?
Under the...
You want to get the out of here.
No, we don't.
Yeah, you do. Get out.
Why do we need to get out of here?
There's
And
honest
you can
reason.
speak us kindly. You don't have to say profanity. Do you have some sort of jurisdiction here?
Yeah.
What's that jurisdiction?
I'm on strike with all these other people.
You're on strike, so you get to tell other people to get out
Yes.
with using the F word if you're
Yes,
on
I
strike. That's right. You can use your freedom of speech. Yeah, walk away.
Wait, what happened?
He's like, you guys can
Guys, don't be afraid, okay? As Jews, you're a light in this world wherever there's darkness. Never be afraid. So this calm composure is actually something that I've always had naturally. I've never lost my cool, and I remember growing up as a kid seeing some friends of mine or even brothers of mine lose their cool, seeing red or black in their eyes, you know, when someone just like loses it, and always looking at that reaction of a person and saying, how did they just lose it? Why? Like, you know, you can't control yourself. So for me, it's always been natural to be completely collected in myself and knowing who I am and acting with the intentions of what I truly want to do, not only what in the moment I feel like I should do. I would say that also when I'm engaging people, although I'm very open-minded and I'm non-aggressive and I'm actually calming them down, I'm also very confident and very strong.
Right.
And there is a line between verbal attacks, verbal communication, and physical attacks.
Right.
And if someone did try to touch me, I would respond.
Right.
I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to ever have to get into a fight or any type of physical altercation. But if that moment happens, I'm prepared for it. But I'm going to do everything that I can to prevent that from happening.
I think that's a great segue into like our next topic. Like one of the things where I saw you get frustrated with in reading your tweets and reading your comments about Dave Chappelle's Saturday Night Live skit, you were upset by what he was doing. Why did that frustrate you so much? What was the real, what was the real underlying factor there? Was it because Dave Chappelle was a comedian? Was it because Dave Chappelle was someone famous? What really frustrated you?
I actually love Dave Chappelle's comedy, so I have no issue with him as a person. And to the contrary, I would say that growing up, I was a fan, as many of us were growing up with his comedy. I'm gonna flip the situation for a second. A friend of mine actually made a tweet about this, and I think it's a good example. Imagine right after George Floyd, right, when everyone was really hurt and feeling for this person, there was an injustice that was done, right? A non-black person goes on Saturday Night Live and starts making fun of racism. How would you feel?
It'll be frustrating.
So to us that are experiencing anti-Semitism, a non-Jew goes up and makes fun of anti-Semitism as if it's not a real issue and starts off the statement by reading, I'm going to read a statement, I condemn anti-Semitism, and making a joke out of it that everyone's laughing, and puts the paper away and say, okay, now I can say all the anti-Semitic things that I want, basically because now I read the statement. No.
I denounce anti-Semitism in all its forms. And I stand with my friends in the Jewish community. And that, Kanye, is how you buy yourself some time.
If you're a comedian, you can still be a horrible person, right? It's everyone's saying, oh, but it's just comedy. But there's a certain line, right? There's a certain line, yes. I think that line today with the younger generation, they're bringing it too far back and not allowing comics to express themselves.
Right, and you've said that.
But there is a line, right? And there's a line for black jokes, and there's a line for Jewish jokes, and there's a line for different communities of when it starts to be a little bit negative and playing on tropes that have historically persecuted those populations. So he starts off with that. Then he starts making fun of anti-Semitism not really being an issue. Then he says things like, for example, the Jewish community needs to stop blaming black people for the Holocaust. I mean, as Jews, we look at each other, and I've asked this to many Jews within the community. We've never in our lives heard any conversation of Jews looking at black people and blaming them for the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So what is this? It's putting another idea in the minds of a lot of young black people, hearing like, oh, the Jews are blaming us for their Holocaust. That's why we're suffering. That's another reason. So there's a lot of very subtle things that were done in the monologue that I think were very calculated, right? Whether it's him that wrote the script or someone else, to give this idea that the Jews and the black people are against each other, that anti-Semitism is not that bad, and that's why it's so dangerous to desensitize the society from anti-Semitism, because once society doesn't recognize it, doesn't care about it, then those who really want to pursue it, which I don't think Dave Chappelle does, but there are many people who do, then it gives them the ability to push that forward.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in media try to desensitize racism as a whole, right? So I agree with you. I think a lot of times what we try to use comedy to desensitize kind of what's happening and what's really impacting people. But I think now that it's happening to Jewish people, especially with Kanye and everything like he's been saying, it's almost just like, are we now supporting the cancel culture? Because I know you said you're against cancel culture, as am I. I think people need an opportunity to learn and make peace.
So a lot of people that have these very negative opinions about the Jewish people in Israel, I want to try to engage with them to correct the situation. So, but at the same time, I do understand that, let's say, the Yeezys, right, the shoe brand, I have Yeezys. I'm not wearing them right now because I feel offended by what Kanye said. but I'm not burning them either, right? I want to have a conversation at some point with Kanye to correct that, and eventually when we correct and heal those relations, then I'd be able to wear them again.
Do you think that conversation will ever happen?
I hope so. I've been trying for several weeks to make it. You saw that video that I made about Kanye West.
It got an amazing amount of response, right? Like, celebrities reposted it. Like, so many people in the comments were just like praising what you said and how you reacted to his statement, because it was a very educated and, you know, fact-based response. If you were to speak to Kanye, right, and you said you have made attempts, if you were to speak to Kanye, how would you kind of start that conversation? What would be the first thing you'd say to him?
Well, it depend on his mood, of course. Each person, when you ever interact, you have to stabilize the conversation and build on that trust. And seeing other interviews that he's done where he doesn't really trust people right off the bat, even people that he's known, I would try to develop more of a human-to-human interaction and relationship for him to understand that I'm coming with love, I'm a human being right in front of you. And I would also understand that there's a lot of things that he was praising the Jewish community for and loving the Jewish community, right? And he said that he feels like he's a Jew himself. Those are things that we can build bridges on first, and then we can discuss and explain to him the things that you said. This is the reason for why it triggers trauma within the Jewish population, and why then it sounds offensive, and why then all the other truth that you may have talked about just is completely removed. Same thing with Kyrie, right? He didn't even write anything. He posted a documentary. And in this documentary, he talks about a lot of truth. A lot of truth that a lot of the people of color, not only in North America, but also in the Caribbeans and also in South America, that were taken in the transatlantic slave trade, do descend from tribes of Israel. Not all of them, but a strong percentage enough that there's clearly a phenomenon happening now, generations later, of an awakening of these communities realizing that they're part of Israel. And so that is true. However, in this documentary, there was a lot of false things and anti-Semitic things against the Jewish people, that when the Jews hear that, then everything else is canceled. They can't even hear anything else because you just triggered their trauma.
Do you feel like what they did to him and how the Nets dealt with that situation was a bit aggressive, or do you agree with it? Do you think it wasn't aggressive enough for the fact that he didn't apologize right off the rip?
I think if this video wasn't tweeted right after Kanye, that reaction probably wouldn't have happened. Right? When you trigger a community that is in that moment very traumatized because of a current event, any reaction they're going to get is usually going to be much stronger than they would have had before that event or much after that event. I think that was the reaction, sort of like the pain that they felt about Kanye, that they couldn't really do anything about him, was then projected onto Kyrie. Again, I think Kyrie's a truth seeker. Right? I've seen a lot of the things that he's done, a lot of things that he's promoted. There may be some conclusions that we've disagreed on, and I do also want to one day have a conversation with Kyrie to explain to him that the truth, again, that you're bringing up, they're getting swallowed up by a few lies that then is preventing the Jewish community from even hearing what you're saying, and then there's this miscommunication that's happening.
Do you think he should have been suspended?
I don't think he should have been suspended. I do think he should have been much quicker to apologize for the offense.
Because he did.
Yeah, he did. It wasn't right away, but he did. And the moment that he did, and he clarified there were some things in that documentary that were wrong, and I was wrong for sharing it because I have a responsibility to make sure that my platform with millions of followers has correct information, and that was not my intention. For me, that's fine. But I also want to see actions of repairing, right? I don't want to just see, I'm sorry, that doesn't mean that you should continue being suspended. I also want to see him take actions of have that conversation. Have a conversation with a Jewish leader and put it on camera for both communities to hear the different perspectives, and not in a challenging or in a debate. Like me and you, we're not debating, right? We're having an open conversation of bringing different ideas and truth to the table to see, for me to learn and for you to learn. So those are the conversations that I would recommend him and other individuals like Ice Cube and Nick Cannon and Kanye and Chappelle that have sort of, branched out into being individuals that talk about a reality that they're experiencing, but they're doing it in a way that is causing more darkness.
Why do you think all this is happening now? Why is there such a divide and so much animosity between the Black community and the Jewish community? Like, why is this, being so present in current, society? Do you think a lot of it is from media? Do you think a lot of it is from, Mr. West, right? Kanye saying what he said, and thus making people come out of the closet? Like a lot with what Trump did, right? When Trump came out and started speaking, about his feelings towards different communities and different races, you saw a lot more people come from the woodworks and speaking their truth. Do you think this divide is something that's always been there, and now it's like at the forefront? Do you think there's something deeper than that between the Black and brown community and the Jewish community?
So I don't have the answer, right? I can only tell you what I think about the situation given the certain truths that I have obtained thus far at 29 years old. I think there's two things happening. I think that there is some sort of metaphysical reality where a lot of tribes of Israel are coming back to the consciousness of their identity and coming back to the reality and the experience of each other.
Yep.
Part of the projects that I'm working on is a documentary series on these lost tribes in Africa. And there's something happening in this universe around us that there's an awakening. I also think that there are certain people, maybe corporations, maybe societies, whatever it may be, that are intentionally triggering both communities to fight each other. And I think that there's an intention to keep the Jewish and black community divided, because if we actually united, imagine what that would look like.
I think right there, that's a nail on the head for me, right? Like, you definitely hit the nail on the head with that. I think a lot of people need to realize that our fight isn't with one another, it's against white supremacy. And the reason why I brought you here today is because I don't want to have hate and animosity in my heart and have my children also see people that, you know, look like you be the bad guy, right? We have to understand each other and we have to know who the person is, because this is something my mother taught me. And I think this is the only way that I can do it for other people in our community, both yours and mine. Like, this is going to open up such a great debate between people of color and Jewish people, because it's two people that come from each side of the table coming together.
And sometimes coming from the same origins too.
Hell yeah. I think this has been a great conversation. We really didn't eat much food because this conversation really
This
filled
is
us
the
up,
food.
right? But I think I'm very impressed by you, your poise, and how you kind of maintain your composure. And I love the fact that everything that you speak is things that can be backed up and things that are factual. And I appreciate that, because I'm very similar in that way. Of course, there's a lot more comedy in my delivery, but I feel like it's important for people like you to exist and to talk, and to communicate to the world, both for your people and for mine.
I appreciate it. I want to tell you, by the way, that I'm a very introverted person, but when you start to break down those layers, I'm actually very funny. So
Yeah.
it just takes time to open up.
So I have an idea. I think we're gonna wrap this up. Let's finish this up. And they don't have dessert here, but I think we can maybe grab some beers after and keep the conversation going.
Let's do it.
All right, cool. Thank you so much for being on Dinner with Ish.
Of course, man.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. Got that food for the soul and food for the mind. Great conversation, stay in tune with the grind. Looking at my rollie, man, it's about that time. Grab a plate to eat, sipping on fine wine. From activists to actors, models to musicians. Best cooks in the world, just chefing in the kitchen. Episodes are spicy, you don't want to miss. This is Dinner with Ish, you know. It's good vibe everywhere. Like a fantasy, got me high, got me flying away. Just free your mind, free your soul. Grab a glass and just let go.